How's my sound? Is it good? Okay. Just getting a little bit of an echo here, so just trying to get used to that. Anyways, I'm used to being out. You see this picture here. I'm used to being out at the research farm, and this is my comfort zone, sitting in front of a Zoom camera. Maybe not so comfortable, but I'm going to try my best to take this opportunity to share what I know with regards to building soils. But you'll see that I'm going to come to it from an agriculture research technician standpoint. So I will be talking a lot, and thank you, Taryn, about soil testing. And from that, try to bring you on my journey of how I look at soils and how I think of building them. I have the opportunity to work with a lot of good farmers in the Yukon, and they teach me a lot of stuff. So I'm going to try to share what I know. Thank you. So we have soils, and I'm going to talk about backyard gardens, the soils we're working in our yard, more so than greenhouses. Greenhouses get a little bit more complicated, and I want to keep this structured to our gardens. Some people do raised beds. They'll bring in soil, but these pictures I show here are the soils that we have in the Yukon. So these are the sort of the Bikini Valley soils. And I put this wasn't a great picture, but what I want to show in this picture is that our soils, in a way I look at it, is our soils are thin. This top duff layer is where all the organic material is. And then you can see that the roots are starting to, and the soil is starting to move down into here. But when you get down into, I call it zone B, the sublayer, that's when our soils start becoming very silty, very clay-like, and less functional. You really want to work in this top layer of soils. So when we're thinking about what we're working with, we're trying to create a soil that has good texture, that has nutrients and organic matter, and that the pH is relatively stable. So how do you determine that? Well, the first thing you need to do, well, not the first thing you need to do, either your garden's telling you it's your soil's doing fine and everything you're doing, everything's growing well, but one thing you can do is test your soil. I'm showing our website here, which gives you some information about testing your soil. So you can go to yukon.ca, but I prefer to use Google. You go to Google, type in testing soils Yukon. It should bring you to a hit that allows you to go to this link. In this link will be what we test for, how you can test it, where you bring it, and the details around that. So when we're talking about testing soils, for our backyard gardeners, we're testing maybe one soil sample a year. Sometimes we do two. It's the first time we've seen you, but you want to test your soils on a regular basis, and you don't want it. We can't be testing every garden bed. So you want to bring us in a composite sample, or a sample made up of all the different garden beds, or you can take a garden bed that's not doing so well and say, what's going on here? I would like to know a little bit more. And we can do one soil sample a year for our backyard gardeners, and we really enjoy providing that information. So how do you take that soil sample? Well, I use this as a picture. So this is when I'm like, you need to take it from different points in your garden. So this is a field diagram. You're trying to, in a field, you're trying to avoid the low spots. You're trying to avoid the edges, and you go across that field in a zigzag type pattern and pick up soil samples from different points in that field. The same thing with your garden. So you want to go through your garden, and you want to take your garden trawl, and you want to stick that in the garden. I tell people, take that, take a scoopful, put it into a pail, go to the next level, take another scoopful, put that in the pail, and keep going, and do about 7, 8, 9 spots, and then mix that pail up. And then all I want to see is a sandwich bag full, about 2 cups of soil, brought to the agriculture branch. The agriculture branch is in at the Elijah Smith building. 300 Main Street. We're in room 320. So third floor, I say we're kind of right across from the elevators. So come in there, show up with your soil sample, have it labeled. It came from garden A, or it came from garden B, or it came from garden A, B, and C, and let us know what it is. And then the big thing is, let us know your name, but we will email you the soil results. So we need that email address. If you don't have an email address, we can always call you and let you know that it's available at the front desk. So you've done that. You've brought your soil sample in, and now we're going to send it out to a lab in Edmonton, and they're going to provide us a soil result. So this is what your soil result looks like. A lot of information on here. So, and this is from my research, from our research farm. We have a research farm sort of at the junction of the Yukon and Keeney rivers in at the research forest. If you ever see the gate open when you go through into the gate, and there's another second gate on the right, please come in and visit us and say hi. Most of the times the gate is closed. We're only out there probably 3 or 4 days a week during the summer, and we're not out there in the winter. Anyway, so you get your soil results. We email that to you. If we see anything that stands out, we might add a little bit of a description to that, but basically we hand it to you and let you do with it as you please. But there's information to figure out how you interpret your soil results. And I'm sort of plugging our Yukon Gardener's Manual, which we sell. I think it's $21. We sell at our front desk, again, in the Elijah Smith building. So you can buy that. You could also borrow it from the library if you don't want to buy one. But I find this a really good something to reference when I need a little bit more information, I'm missing something. So with the soil results, soils, the more I learn, the more I realize how complicated it can be. There's a few graphics in the manual here that I threw in on this this slide. And what I thrown in here is like, this is my favorite here, is realizing that yes, these are the nutrients we need to be aware of, but as our pH changes up here, some of these nutrients become less available. It doesn't, the parts per million doesn't change, the concentration doesn't change, but the pH changes the availability of that nutrient to that plant. So, and this is what we're talking about, is making nutrients available. So if we go back to what my presentation is supposed to be about with regards to building soils, when we build soils, we want to feed that plant. We want to have those nutrients available for that plant. So we got to pay attention to some of the details. And I'm not a prof. I'm not going to get into the soil science here, but I just want you to be aware that it gets a little bit complicated. And I'm going to take you through the steps in the next few slides to try to simplify it as best I can and how I look at it when I'm approaching it, because I like to keep things as simple as possible. And this other illustration really talks about if you're missing something, the plant's only going to get so big. So, and in this case, it's a barrel. And they're saying that, well, you're missing nitrogen. So that's as full as your barrel is going to get. But if you had enough nitrogen, you had enough potassium, you had enough phosphorus, the barrel can get fuller. So it's just those, for me, those diagrams really help me understand how it works, because I'm more of a visual learner than reading the text about it. But the text is there as well and really talks to how you can understand your soils sort of at that science level. So everybody's soil seems to look different. And everybody uses different amendments, use their own recipe with regards to how they amend their soils, how they build their soils. Over here, and I'm sorry to throw a graph at you. When I'm at presentations and I see a slide like this, I'm like, oh boy. But I just want to show you a few things within this graph and from different soil results. So I've taken soil results from the research farm. I've taken our market garden. I've taken our market garden, which we've added many years of compost to, and a newish field. And then I've compared it to some of our gardeners. And I think I took the last 1, 2, 3, 4 gardeners soil results that we received and threw them in here and just wanted to show what everybody's soil looks like. And one thing we see a lot of, and you see this at the research farm, is the pH creeping up. And we want to keep that pH as neutral as possible. pH 7 points, neutral is 7. A pH 7.7, 7.8 is creeping up. So why is it creeping up? How do we watch that? How do we control that? And those are things that these soil results can tell you, is my pH moving? So if you do a soil sample, say you've done a soil sample 3 years back, I would encourage you to do another soil sample and compare the results side by side. That will really give you an idea, is my soil changing? What I'm doing, is that impacting the plants? The plants, at the end of the day, the plants really tell you, your production really tells you what's doing well. But when you start getting into trouble, or you start seeing things not be as productive, that's when you can go back to your soil results and see what is changing for you. Sometimes it's you're just not home to water enough, or it was a cool season. Those factors come in, but what we're trying to look at is what can we control in the soil to improve our success in that garden. So other things to look at is, you can see across the board, well, maybe not across the board, Gardener D here has ample nitrogen. This is a fully fertilized garden, and it's probably doing very well. And they're just tracking their garden and seeing how things are being impacted. So we like to see the samples before you fertilize. This probably came in after it was fertilized. So most our gardens are missing nitrogen. And this nitrogen is my first go-to when I look at the soil results. Because I know that is a big limiting factor. We do not have the microorganisms, or it's hard to create the microorganisms in your garden that replace that nitrogen. You need to replace that nitrogen after every year, because the plants use it up. And then, yeah, like I said, I watch the pH and I watch the organic material. That's the O&M here. So organic material, you want a good healthy amount of organic material. 1.6 is getting low, but it's better than lower than that. But you do want to see something maybe 3.1, and that you can see by adding compost every year, we're able to move our organic material from 1.6 to 3.1. So we're trending in the right direction. When you get up to 31% organic material, well, you're kind of watching again your plants, because when you have that much organic material, if you probably have good soil life in your soils. And then that's when you have soil life, when you have microorganisms, when you have bugs in there, they are starting to feed on that nitrogen and can take it away from the plant. So there can be too much organic material, but I've seen many gardeners come in with high organic material in that 30% range, and their garden's still producing. So it's really that available nitrogen to your garden that you got to watch out for. And off to the far right, I've included the Dawson soils, and I hope your screens are big enough that you can see all this information. And the reason I included that is because Dawson was unglaciated, and their soils are much different than our soils. And where you see that is really in the pH. They're working on a different end of the, not the different end of the pH. They're working on the side of an acidic soil versus we're working on the side of an alkaline soil. So the availability of nutrients tend to be a little bit more, but just the breadth of crops like certain pHs. So, and it just gives it gives Dawson a nice pH to work with. And also you'll see that in those unglaciated soils, they start, this is a raw soil, unlike some of the other gardens that we see here, which are probably well amended. This is a raw soil that's already starting at 19.3% organic material. All these NPK levels are in parts per million, by the way. So, and then I kind of like, you got your electroconductivity. You watch that, you look at that, and I'll talk a little bit more here. I think my next slide. Yeah, so when I get my soil results, so back to what you're going to receive, you're going to receive this page, and I go to 3 different spots. So I go over, first thing I look at is, what are we missing? So here we're missing nitrogen, could use a bit of potassium, but this graph really tells me a lot really fast. Okay, well, if it was that one garden, well, all these levels would be in optimum to excess. So, and then I go to the soil quality. What is the soil quality? So what's the pH in my soil? So 7.4, neutral, right where I want to be. Electroconductivity, it's good. So it's not getting high. It's not up into the 4. So I don't have to worry about it being too sort of, when I look at electroconductivity, I also go right back down here to sodium. I want to know that it's not too alkaline. There's not too many charges in there. So, and I see it very stable. And then I look at the organic matter. Do we have some? Yes, no. This could use a little bit of organic matter. I want to start using amendments that allow me to add organic matter. And this is where we get to talking about soil building, is what amendments can I use to improve my soil. So there's certain ways to go about it. Traditionally, I go at it for, I look at these recommendations down here, and then I add exactly what they want. It says to add, let's use potatoes as a scenario. And I'm going to go down here. And so, like I said, I look at this, what's missing. I look at this, try to get a sense for the quality of my soil. And then I go to, what do I need to add to my soil as sort of a formula to get things to grow well. So when I think of a formula, I think I'm going to add so much sugar, so much fat, so much salt to get what the way things need to be to taste good, or in this case, grow well. So I'm going to add N, P, and K, and I'm going to watch the sulfur. So in this scenario, these are the recommendations I got for the market garden at the research farm. And it's telling me I need about, I usually go for average. I don't go for excellent. We have a short growing season. We can go for excellent, but it might put up too much growth and not worry about rooting or doing other things. So I'm cautious when it comes down to things. So I always go at that average level and not push it too much. So I'm looking at my potatoes need 100 pounds of nitrogen. Phosphorus, it says 0, potassium 73. So I always add a bit of phosphorus. If you went back to knowing that our pHs are trending to be high, you know that phosphorus restricted, and also knowing that we have calcium, and magnesium, I think it is a good practice to add a bit of phosphorus, make that phosphorus available. We do have phosphorus in our soil. If I went back to the results, let's see if I can go back quickly. If I go back to my results, we have greater than 80 parts per million phosphorus. So that's about 213 pounds per acre of phosphorus. It's there. But I want to add a little bit because I don't think it's available to the plant. And you see that sometimes in the responses of the plant. And if you start adding it, you'll see it in the response of your yield. So for potatoes, if we go back up, the recommendation's 100 pounds. I round it off to, it says 112 pounds per acre of nitrogen. So I'm going to round that to 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen, just because it's really easy. Now, how do you convert 100 pounds to your garden? My rule of thumb is just move that decimal spot. So this is my calculation right here. So I take 100 pounds of nitrogen. Well, I times it by 2.2, that's pounds to kgs. And then 2.5 is acres to hectares. And then to meters squared, I need to divide that by 10,000. And then to get to grams, I need to times that. So there's math involved, and I don't know, I'm not doing a math course today. But a simple rule of thumb is just take that 100 pounds and say it's 10 grams per meter square. I know most of us work in feet still. My gardens are 3 by 6 feet, my raised beds. I used in this scenario a 4 by 20 garden because this is what downtown urban gardeners garden sizes are. And that's equal to about 7 meters squared. So if I need 10, if I have a garden at Doug's, and I'm wanting to know how much nitrogen I need to put in there, I'm saying, well, 4 by 20 equals about 7 meters squared. So I did that conversion. Google, you want to convert anything, type it into Google, say I got 4 by 20, do the math. 4 by 20 is what, 80? Have to, yeah, 80 square feet. And then you put 80 square feet to meters squared, it'll give you that answer. So, and then, so I need 10 grams per meter square. So 10 times 7, and I need 70 grams of nitrogen for that garden bed. So what does that mean? What we're adding nitrogen to the bed. And sorry, I'm spending so much time on nitrogen, but if we go back up, whoops, we go back up, we see that most our gardens are low in nitrogen. So that's why I'm kind of starting as nitrogen as my ground zero with regards to amending my soils. So what does that mean? Well, that means I could add 1/6 of a container of Miracle-Gro, which is 12-4-8. And 12-4-8, 12 is the nitrogen, 12% nitrogen in that Miracle-Gro container. 4 grams of phosphorus, or 4% phosphorus, and 8% potassium. And then we have sheep manure. So, and that's 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, nice balanced fertilizer. Chicken manure, a lot richer than sheep manure. So it's a lot richer in all the components. So phosphorus, potassium, and of course, nitrogen. So when I do this, I now know I need 70 grams. So I take that 70 grams and I divide it by 12%, so 0.12, and it tells me I need 583 grams of Miracle-Gro in order to take care of the nitrogen. But guess what else I'm getting? I'm also getting phosphorus and potassium. And if I go back to my soil results, I'll notice that I need potassium as well for my potatoes. But guess what? I'm getting a little phosphorus. Is that a bad thing? If you add too much phosphorus, it can be a bad thing. But in this case, I don't think it is. I don't think I can go wrong. And again, this doesn't have to be exact science. I've used some estimates here. I know I can add more fertilizer if I wanted better growth, but I'm just adding something here in order to get that nitrogen. Now, the Miracle-Gro says you can add this amount would cover 22 square meters. Well, we're using probably half that or a third of that actually. So we're using a third of that. You can definitely add more, that wouldn't hurt. And what you're doing is watching the response of your plants and trying to get an idea of what you're trying to do. You are going to have to do a little bit of math or ask somebody to help you with a little bit of math. So, but there are a bit of calculations, but if you go based on the recommendations on the back of the container, it works. Recommendations on the back of containers for sheep manure, chicken manure, fish fertilizer, blood meal, urea, not there. Those you have to somewhat calculate, but a good rule of thumb is that 7-meter garden, you can go with 1 bag of sheep manure. You're going to reduce that by, what is that, 1/10 for chicken manure. So you don't need as much chicken manure. Fish fertilizer, same as chicken manure. It's rich in nitrogen. So, and this is another good fertilizer. Blood meal, well, say you're using sheep manure, and you're like, God, I'm going to be short on my N. I feel like I can't add enough sheep manure. I'm going to be short on my N. Well, you can, whoops, what did I do? Page up, page down. You can supplement with blood meal. So you're looking at what you can do with your different amendments. Now, this is another book I use a lot. It's at the EMR library, is Vegetable Production on the Prairies. The reason I'm showing this book is in this book is just general recommendations of how much nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or sulfur you need for certain crops. If you look at these numbers, well, the phosphorus stays pretty similar, but the amount of N, some are big feeders, some are not big feeders. So your potatoes, big feeder. Your carrots, they need quite a bit N. Radishes, not so much, and that's probably why they do so well. Cole crops, they're medium feeder, and then beets are, I would call an easy feeder. So they don't need anything, but they always do need that phosphorus and potassium. And it always surprises me when I add the potassium for carrots. And when I do things at the research farm, I base it on recommendations. So I use commercial fertilizers. I use N, P, and K in separate bags, and I blend it together and fertilize that way. You don't need to do that. You can use blended fertilizers like those manures. So, but that's how I do it. And I'm always surprised at how much K the carrots need. So if, even though you're maybe not planting carrots every year, in the same spot, I should say, you want to be adding that phosphorus and that potassium just so that when the carrots do get to that location, that you've built up that source. So just to keep things simple. So sources of nitrogen. Well, manure is a good source. Ground out animal parts. So there's feather meal, there's blood meal. Those are good sources. Seed meals, so there's alfalfa, cotton, there's some other ingredients there. Fish fertilizers, obviously good. And then some of those chemical fertilizers, urea, nitrate, they work as well. But there's other sources out there. Really depends on where you're thinking that you can get nitrogen. So I generally look at the garden centers. I look at Home Hardware, Canadian Tire for my sources of nitrogen. For my home use, I use a different, I definitely go to the garden centers for the research farm. So, and then for phosphorus, you got rock phosphate, you got bone meal, and again, chicken manure. And you'll see for potassium, chicken manure is another good source. Potash would be one, and wood ash would be another source. Wood ash, I'm always a little cautious with because it comes with a lot of calcium. And if we went back to looking at the calcium in our soils, we have plenty of it, but I don't know if it actually hurts. And we could have a conversation about that in a debate. And it'd be nice if you guys were in the room that we could have that round table discussion on these things. So just remember when you're looking at that bag of fertilizer, if you have a 12-4-8-2, that means you have 12% of that fertilizer, that blood meal, that chicken manure, whatever the numbers are, those are your percentages and you calculate up. So your N, P, K, and S. So I sort of skipped by compost, and compost can be a good source of nutrients. It is a good source of nutrients, but to me, it's a source of organic matter. And then when oh God, I see organic matter is cut off. That's percentage organic matter. Anyways, compost, if you want to add organic material, if you're in the same range as I am in 1.6, and you're like, God, I got to build up that organic matter. How do I do it? Compost is a good place to do it, but not all compost is created equal. City compost is a great ingredient. It provides you your phosphorus, your potassium, but you'll see that it has a lot less N. So if you're thinking that city compost is going to provide that key ingredient of nitrogen, it's not there. You're going to want to supplement with a feather meal or a bone meal or a fish fertilizer. So, and then the other thing you got to watch out for is the amount of salt, the amount of salinity you're adding to that soil. So with compost, you can add a bit of that and you're going to track that year after year, but it works, and you can always water out salt. So you can always add a lot of water to push that salt down. The water will grab onto that salt and bring it down with it. So that's one way to do it. pH is, you can help creep your pH up, But if you're adding a few bucketfuls or a few bags full of fertilizer to your, or sorry, compost to your garden every year, you're fine. But if you have compost from a farm source, which usually have manure, uh, hold on to that source, treat them well, and definitely a good product to use. So what can you do to build soils? Well, I kind of Googled this because what I do to build soils is I think of my crop rotation. I think of having a rest year in the space I have, but not all our backyard gardeners have that ability to put in a rest year, put in a green manure crop in order to build your soils. And for us up here, what we're trying to do when we're building soils is add nutrients and also add organic matter. The organic matter gets depleted pretty quick, especially when you use practices such as I do, where I am tilling that soil. It breaks that organic matter down a little quicker. There's many resources available at the EMR library with regards to permaculture and other organic practices that help you build your soils. And I suggest networking, talk to people, like finding out what other people doing and where they're having success is a great way to do it. And it's all trial and error. It's really watching your garden, how it behaves. For me, I go to some of the commonly available products. Manure is one, compost is another. Like I said, chicken manure can be a good one, but so can beef, sheep, any kind of manure you can get your hands on. And look at the crops you're planting, try to see if you can rest year, put in some of those deep rooted crops, plant cover crops if you have the space. I like the idea of covering with mulch. The nice thing about covering with mulch and nice thing about having organic matter is it helps retain the moisture. So you can trap that moisture. And as you know, although we had a beautiful rain last night, as you know, we just don't have enough of it and it disappears way too quick. And I don't know how much time you like watering your gardens, but the more I can get out of it, the happier I am. Use permanent beds, know what your garden's doing. That's concentrate your efforts. And low-tech tillage, it's just not beating up your soils. So low-tech tillage is actually taking it, flipping it once and leaving it there. And when you're doing that, you're trying to incorporate that organic matter that's on the top and put it on that. I stole all that information. But what you're trying to do when you're building soils is create some texture to that soils. If I go back to that previous slide, if you look at the clay cliffs, you see that our soils can be very silty. And what we're trying to do is incorporate some organic matter, some nutrients that are available. There is a lot of nutrients in that silty loam soils we have, but it's the nutrients that we need. And that comes down to most times the potassium, available phosphorus, and nitrogen. So, and then watch that pH. If your pH is trending, if you're starting to get up into the 8s, then your pH is trending the wrong way. And you got to think about what you're doing to your soils that has your pH is trending that way. One thing you can do, and I didn't talk about it much here in this presentation, is just use some of those nutrients that have a bit of sulfur in there that will help stabilize your pH. I've seen a lot of people try to bring their pH down, some with some success, but generally it's not enough to start growing blueberries or things like that. So that's how I approach building soils. Is I really approach it from those soil results and looking at those soil results and trying to understand what I need to do in order to create a garden that's going to be successful. So if you have any questions, I guess I got to look at the chat now. And I hope this was helpful. And you can always reach out to me after the fact, or if you have a question about soil sampling, you can contact me at my email. That's probably your best bet. But Taryn shared my phone number. That works as well. It's just sometimes I am in the field and not available to answer my phone. This is so strange not talking to you guys directly. So let's see here. Question about composting. If it's allowed. That's funny. So the first question is about what do I put into my compost? Should I put lots of glass clippings? Only a small amount. For example, I use compost in the veggie garden usually. So you got to build a compost pile that's going to work for you. And there's many resources out there, but you have to have that grassy material, but you also have to have some nutrient-rich material. So those food scraps from your kitchen. And you want to create a compost that's going to be active. So it's some of that nutrients. It can't just all be grass. So you definitely want to do that. We do live in a city that when we put things into, or city, we live in a territory. When we put things in our compost piles, they can become attractants. You just want to manage that. So you want to have a good cover over your, so if you're putting, say, God, who knows what you have, but some of those kitchen scraps, make sure you do cover it up with grass in order to deter that. And then make sure it's in a location that's away from home and you're not going to surprise anything because things will go looking for it. They have animals up here have strong noses and are always looking for food. So, but using some of the city compost or getting some from a farmer is a good option as well. Next question. We have a potato talk. What's the date on that potato talk again? Oh, you answered it in the chat? So our research farm events have not been completely scheduled for this year. We're still looking for the date, but I believe we're not going to have the typical open house we usually do. We're going to be focusing on industry. I need to reach out to forestry to find out when their open house is, and I'd like to have an open house, have the gates open that day and be available for questions. We do have a potato talk coming up in August. I just don't remember the date. So, and I think Taryn's answering it in the chat. So how deep do we take the soil samples? Thank you for that question. I'm sorry I did not explain that. So a trowel is about 6 inches typically. That I would just take it from that active, I always say the active layer, 0 to 8 inches is generally where you want to take that soil sample. So if you go down a few inches, that's where our root zone is. That's where we want to know what's in the soil. So generally that, if your tiller's going a little deeper than that, if you're tilling or you're really energetic when you're turning that over by the shovel, maybe you can go down a little deeper. You want a representative sample and you want to know what's going on for that plant. So perfect. There's my potato talk, August 25th. All right, 12 p.m. at the research farm. What pH do Haskaps do well with? Oh, that's a great question. I imagine they're not like blueberries, so they're not trending to that acid side. They seem to be a very hardy plant, although I'm seeing some signs that they're not as hardy as I was expecting. But generally, I don't think as long as you have a neutral soil, you're probably good. I don't think you have to worry about it as much as you do with blueberries. Typically, blueberries are not successful because they trend towards that acid soil. What type of mulch is recommended? There are colored ones. Are those okay? I imagine we're talking about wood mulch. It depends what you're trying to do. Some of those colored ones, I don't know how they get their color. Cedar is traditionally a really good mulch if you want to suppress weeds. They work great for shrubs. But I think anything that just does not create that environment for weeds to grow is probably your best mulch. I'm having success with just using we had some of our trees chipped out at the research forest. So that's boreal forest. There was a bit of aspen in there, a bit of probably spruce and pine. And that's been working really well for me. But if you're planting a vegetable garden in there, you have to create a space. You either need to do a starter or create a space for that to grow, and then you use your pathways or other things you're using the mulch for. Depends where you're using that. Uh, there's probably the next question is considering that homemade compost is variable from year to year, is there value in having it tested? I think there of course there's value in having it tested. The more you know, the more you can adopt. But at the same time, I think like I did with the recommendations on the nitrogen, and then the bleed off on that, saying that yeah, you want to get that phosphorus, you want to get that potassium in there. You don't have to make it an exact science, but you do have to limit yourself on providing too much where you're going to burn the nutrients. So am I getting a flag that the time's coming up? Yeah. So anyways, God, I did not answer that question at all. I think if you have concerns about your compost, come and visit us. Let's have the discussion and let's see if that's something we should be testing. But I think you can feel confident that you're adding your homemade compost to your garden is going to be valuable. At the end of the day, what you're going to do is add that, say in the fall, work it in, take your soil sample in the spring, and then see what you need from there. Okay. When is the best time to soil sample? I like to soil sample in the fall. So at the end of the season, just before the ground freezes up, is I want to take that soil sample so that I can plan in the winter. What do I need for my garden next year? But the best time is before you fertilize. So say you are getting manure in the fall. Well, you don't want to soil sample after you get the manure. You want a soil sample before you get the manure and then go from there. The spring works as well. And say you did incorporate manure in the fall and you sampled in the spring, then you're going to have a rough idea what you're starting with. So I think one of the things is to soil sample on a regular basis, find a time that works for you and a rotation that works for you. I don't know if you have to soil sample every year if your garden's doing well, but you should soil sample every other year. What I tend to coach people coming to the agriculture branch to do is say soil sample your garden this year, your greenhouse next year, your garden the year following, and get into that routine. And then you can build on your knowledge of what you're doing in your garden is based on your production, but based on your soil results as well, is that helping you succeed. So, and then you got to factor in, of course, what kind of season did I have last year? Was that the thing that impacted me? Or did I go away on holidays for 2 weeks and neglected my garden? Did that impact me? So it's always trial and error and learning from what you're doing. Oh, I like straw as a mulch for raised beds. The only thing I don't like about straw, straw works great. It's really good, but unfortunately, I think you have to remove that straw at the end of the season or incorporate it into the ground because I'm sure everybody has a story about voles, and the voles love that straw. You're just making a nice home for them. So it does work well. It can insulate, it can retain moisture, but it can be a home for rodents. So anyhow, yeah, I like straw.